A disabled kitten was about to give up on life until this dog did something no one expected. Bella, a small kitten with wheels for legs, has spent her days in a shelter, alone and overlooked. She's ready to accept that this is all she'll ever know. Then Tank arrives, an older, grumpy German shepherd with a heart hardened by loss. He's been through pain, and he wants nothing to do with anyone, especially Bella. But something changes when their paths cross. What starts as a simple act of kindness sparks an unlikely connection that neither of them saw coming. As secrets unfold and barriers break, their lives take a turn neither could have ever predicted. What happens when two souls, each broken in their own way, find each other in the most unexpected place? Can they both find healing? Or will their pasts be too much to overcome? Your comments and presence here remind me why I tell these stories. If you still believe in the healing strength of love, truth, and quiet courage, then you're the reason this channel exists. The morning sun filtered through the shelter's dusty windows, casting long shadows across the worn linoleum floor. In the corner, Bella watched as yet another family walked past her enclosure, their eyes barely glancing at the small gray kitten with wheels where her back legs should have been. She had grown accustomed to the way people's gazes would shift away quickly, as if her disability made them uncomfortable. The wheels attached to her tiny frame were lightweight and well-designed, allowing her to move around with relative ease. But potential adopters never stayed long enough to see how well she managed. They never noticed how she could chase a toy mouse or climb onto the lower platforms of her cat tree with determination and grace. "Oh, look at that orange tabby!" a little girl squealed, pointing at the cage next to Bella's. The kitten's heart sank as she watched the family crowd around her neighbor, cooing and taking pictures. She tucked herself further into her corner, her front paws curled beneath her chest. The shelter manager walked past, clipboard in hand, his footsteps heavy with exhaustion. "Another busy weekend," he muttered to himself, barely noticing Bella's withdrawn posture. She had been here so long, she had become part of the furniture. Just another sad story in a building full of them. Through the large window that separated the cat area from the dog kennels, Bella noticed a commotion. Two shelter workers were leading in a new arrival, a large German shepherd with graying fur around his muzzle. Unlike most new dogs who entered the shelter with either fear or excitement, this one moved with slow, deliberate steps, his head hanging low as if carrying an invisible weight. "This is Tank," one worker explained to the shelter manager. "His owner passed away last month. Family couldn't keep him." The manager nodded, making notes on his clipboard with the mechanical efficiency of someone who had heard too many similar stories. Tank didn't bark or whine as they led him to his kennel. He simply walked in and lay down, his back to the world, his large body curled into itself. Bella recognized something in his posture, a familiar resignation that matched her own. Throughout the day, Bella watched as various shelter workers tried to engage with Tank. They offered treats, spoke in cheerful voices, and attempted to coax him for walks. The old dog acknowledged none of it. He remained still, responding only when necessary, his eyes fixed on nothing in particular. "Poor old fellow," a volunteer said while cleaning nearby. "Probably won't be here long, though. People love German shepherds, even older ones." Bella's whiskers twitched at this. She had heard similar optimistic predictions about other animals, had watched as the easy-to-adopt ones came and went. But something about Tank was different. He wasn't just sad or scared like most new arrivals. He seemed empty. As the afternoon wore on, the shelter grew quieter. The parade of potential adopters thinned out, and the workers began their evening routines. Bella wheeled herself to the front of her enclosure, drawn by an inexplicable urge to get a better look at the old dog. Perhaps sensing her attention, Tank lifted his head slightly. Their eyes met through the glass partition. There was no dramatic moment of connection, no sudden spark of friendship. Instead, there was something more subtle, a quiet recognition between two beings who had lost hope in different ways. Bella saw in Tank's eyes the same weariness she felt in her heart. The exhaustion of being overlooked, of being different, of carrying wounds that others couldn't or wouldn't understand. Tank held her gaze for a long moment before lowering his head again, but that brief exchange left Bella feeling less alone somehow. As the shelter lights dimmed for the night, Bella remained at the front of her enclosure, her small body supported by her wheels, her eyes fixed on the dog section. Tank hadn't moved from his spot, hadn't shown interest in his food or water. Yet something about his presence made the shelter feel different tonight. For the first time in weeks, Bella didn't retreat to her corner as darkness fell. Instead, she stayed where she could see Tank, watching as he eventually drifted into what appeared to be a troubled sleep. She didn't understand why, but something about this broken-hearted dog made her feel a little less worthless, a little less invisible. The night settled around them, two lost souls at opposite ends of the shelter, each carrying their own burdens, each believing they were destined to remain alone. Neither could know that this day marked the beginning of something that would change both their lives forever. The shelter's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as another day began. Bella watched from her enclosure as the morning staff arrived, their footsteps echoing through the corridors. They moved efficiently, cleaning cages and replacing food bowls, but their eyes seemed to pass right through her, as if she were invisible. "We need to focus on the newer arrivals," Bella heard the shelter manager say to a volunteer. "The orange tabby and the black kittens came in yesterday. They'll be easy to place." He paused near Bella's enclosure, his expression clouding. "Some of our longer-term residents, well, we do what we can." The words stung like tiny needles in Bella's heart. She knew he meant her. She had been here longer than most, watching countless other cats come and go while she remained, wheels and all. Across the way, Tank lay in his kennel, his large frame barely moving except for the steady rise and fall of his breathing. Unlike the other dogs who barked and wagged their tails when staff members passed, he remained still, his eyes fixed on some distant point only he could see. The shelter workers had mostly given up trying to engage him, leaving him to his solitude. Bella decided to explore the cat room on her own, something she rarely did anymore. Her wheels clicked softly against the floor as she maneuvered between the play structures and scattered toys. The movement wasn't easy. Sometimes her wheels caught on the edge of a mat or slipped on the smooth floor. Each time she stumbled, she felt the weight of her difference more keenly. The sound of excited voices drew her attention to the shelter's entrance. A family was coming in, a mother, father, and a little boy who looked about 7 years old. Bella's heart quickened with hope, despite her best efforts to guard against disappointment. "I want to see all the kitties!" the boy exclaimed, pressing his face against the glass of the cat room. His mother smiled and spoke with the shelter manager, who led them inside. Bella wheeled herself forward carefully, trying to look friendly and appealing. The boy moved from cage to cage, his eyes wide with wonder at each cat he saw. When he reached the enclosure with the new orange tabby, he gasped with delight. "Look at this one, Mom! He's playing with the string toy?" The boy laughed as the tabby kitten batted playfully at a dangling feather. Then his gaze fell on Bella. She saw the moment his expression changed. First curiosity, then confusion, and finally that familiar look of discomfort. "What's wrong with that one?" he asked loudly, pointing at her wheels. "Jimmy, don't point," his mother scolded softly. She glanced at Bella with a mixture of pity and awkwardness. "Let's look at the other kittens, sweetie." Bella backed away slowly, her wheels squeaking slightly on the floor. She retreated to her corner, trying to make herself as small as possible. Through the glass partition, she caught Tank watching the scene unfold, his dark eyes following her movement. For a brief moment, something flickered in his expression, a recognition, perhaps, or an understanding. But he quickly turned away, retreating back into his own world of grief. The family spent another 30 minutes at the shelter, playing with various cats. The little boy's laughter echoed through the room as he dangled toys for the more active kittens. Not once did he look back in Bella's direction. When they finally left, they had filled out an application to adopt the orange tabby. After they were gone, Bella stayed in her corner, her front paws tucked tightly under her chest. The shelter manager passed by, marking something on his clipboard. "Another good match," he said to no one in particular. "That orange fellow will have a great home." The afternoon stretched on endlessly. Bella watched as other potential adopters came and went, their eyes sliding past her enclosure as if it were empty. The wheels that helped her move had become the very thing that made people turn away. Each passing hour seemed to confirm what she had begun to believe, that she was somehow less worthy of love than the other cats. From his kennel, Tank observed it all with an outward appearance of indifference. Yet there were moments when his ears would prick forward at the sound of Bella's wheels, or his eyes would track her movements across the cat room. He made no obvious show of interest, but something about the small gray kitten's quiet dignity in the face of rejection seemed to penetrate the fortress of his grief. As evening approached, Bella gave up trying to attract attention. She sat near the back of her enclosure, watching the shelter staff prepare for closing time. Her reflection in the glass showed what everyone else saw, a broken little cat with wheels instead of back legs. She wondered if this was all she would ever be, the one they passed by, the one they pitied but never chose. The next morning brought a flurry of activity to the shelter. New animals arrived in carriers and crates, their worried faces peering out at their unfamiliar surroundings. Bella watched from her usual corner as the shelter manager paced between the kennels, his forehead creased with worry. "We're running out of space," he muttered to his assistant. "The cat room is nearly full, and we've got 3 more coming in tomorrow." He shuffled through papers on his clipboard, shaking his head. "We'll need to make some tough decisions soon." Bella's ears twitched at his words. She understood enough to know that tough decisions rarely meant anything good for animals like her, the ones who had been here the longest, the ones who were different. Hoping to prove her worth, Bella ventured out to where some of the other cats were playing. Her wheels clicked against the floor as she approached a group batting around a toy mouse. The sound made them pause and look up. "Can I play too?" Bella asked softly, but the other cats had already turned away, resuming their game as if she hadn't spoken. One of them deliberately knocked the mouse in the opposite direction, away from her. From his kennel across the corridor, Tank lifted his head slightly. His eyes followed Bella as she struggled to turn around, her wheels catching on a small tear in the linoleum floor. She wobbled precariously, and for a moment, Tank's muscles tensed as if ready to move. But he remained where he was, watching as she finally regained her balance and retreated to her corner. Later that afternoon, more newcomers arrived. The shelter manager's voice grew increasingly strained as he spoke to his staff. "We're at 120% capacity now. The board's breathing down my neck about resources." He gestured toward the medical supplies cabinet. "We're stretched thin as it is, and special needs cases." His eyes drifted toward Bella's enclosure before quickly looking away. Tank observed all of this from his kennel, his expression unreadable. When a volunteer approached with his food bowl, he turned his face to the wall, maintaining his usual stance of indifference. But his ears remained perked, tracking the sound of Bella's wheels as she moved about her enclosure. Bella tried one more time to connect with the other animals, wheeling herself toward a quiet older cat who seemed less intimidating than the others. "It's nice to have some sun coming through the windows today," she ventured hopefully. The older cat opened one eye, looked at Bella's wheels, and deliberately shifted to face the other direction. The message was clear. She wasn't welcome here either. As evening approached, the shelter manager conducted his final rounds. He paused outside Bella's enclosure, making notes on his clipboard. "Limited resources, special medical needs, long-term resident," he mumbled as he wrote. Each word felt like a stone settling in Bella's stomach. That night, Bella curled up as small as she could make herself, her wheels pressed against the wall of her enclosure. The shelter had grown quiet except for the occasional whimper or meow. Through the glass partition, she could see Tank in his kennel. Unlike other nights when he would be lost in his own world, his eyes were open, fixed on her enclosure. For a brief moment, their gazes met. Bella saw something flicker in Tank's expression, a shadow of recognition, perhaps even concern. But before she could be sure, he lowered his head to his paws, though his eyes remained open, watching. The darkness settled around them, but sleep eluded Bella. She could hear the shelter manager's words echoing in her mind. Tough decisions, limited resources, special needs. She understood what they meant. She had seen other animals disappear before, the ones who stayed too long, the ones who were too sick or too different. In the dim light of the emergency exit sign, Bella caught Tank shifting in his kennel, adjusting his position so he had a clearer view of her enclosure. He made no move to approach or acknowledge her directly, but his vigilance felt somehow deliberate, as if he had appointed himself an unseen guardian. The reality of her situation pressed down on Bella like a heavy blanket. She was different, unwanted, and now she was taking up precious space in an overcrowded shelter. As she finally drifted off to sleep, her last conscious thought was of Tank's watchful gaze, the first sign that perhaps someone in this lonely place had noticed her after all. The day had been particularly hard at the shelter. A family had come in looking for a cat, and once again, Bella had watched hopefully as they passed by her enclosure. The little girl in the family had pointed at her wheels, asking what was wrong with the broken kitty. Her mother had quickly guided her away, whispering something about finding a normal cat instead. Now, as night settled over the shelter, the familiar quiet wrapped around the building like a thick blanket. Most of the animals had already drifted off to sleep, their soft breathing and occasional snores creating a gentle symphony in the darkness. But Bella couldn't rest. She wheeled herself around her enclosure, trying to find a comfortable position. Her wheels felt extra heavy tonight, weighed down by the day's disappointments. As she attempted to turn in the small space, one of her wheels caught on the edge of her water bowl. She tried to push forward, but the angle was wrong. With each attempt to free herself, she only managed to wedge herself further into the corner. "Oh no," she whispered to herself, her heart racing as she realized she was stuck. She tried rocking back and forth, but it only made things worse. Her wheels squeaked against the floor as she struggled, the sound seemingly louder in the quiet night. From his kennel, Tank lifted his head. His eyes, sharp even in the dim light, focused on Bella's predicament. For several long moments he watched her struggle, his expression unreadable. Then, something changed in his face, a softening around his eyes, a slight shift in his usual stern expression. Without warning, Tank rose from his bed. The click of his nails against the floor echoed through the quiet shelter as he padded toward the door of his kennel. The latch, worn loose from years of use, gave way easily under his practiced nose, a trick he'd learned but rarely used. Bella froze when she heard his approach. She'd never been this close to the big dog before, and despite his aged appearance, he was still intimidating. Her heart hammered in her chest as Tank's large form appeared at the entrance to her enclosure. Like his own kennel, the latch on Bella's enclosure was old and loose. Tank nudged it gently with his nose, and it swung open with a soft creak. He moved slowly, deliberately, his steps careful as he approached her. Bella held her breath, unsure whether to be frightened or hopeful. Tank's presence filled her small space, but there was something different about him now. The usual hardness in his eyes had melted into something gentler, something almost kind. With surprising tenderness, Tank lowered his head and nudged Bella's wheels with his snout. The gentle pressure was enough to shift her slightly, easing the wheel free from where it had caught. But Tank didn't stop there. To Bella's astonishment, he began to lick her wheels, cleaning them with careful attention, his rough tongue removing the day's accumulated dust and dirt. What? What are you doing?" Bella whispered, her voice trembling. Tank didn't answer. Instead, he used his nose to gently push her toward the soft blanket in the center of her enclosure, away from the troublesome corner. His movements were careful, almost protective, as if he was handling something precious. The gesture was so unexpected, so gentle, that Bella felt a warmth spread through her chest. For the first time since she could remember, someone was helping her, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. Once Bella was settled on her blanket, Tank stepped back. Their eyes met for a brief moment, and Bella saw something in his gaze that made her breath catch. Recognition, understanding, perhaps even the faintest glimmer of affection. But before she could find the words to thank him, Tank turned and padded back to his own kennel, leaving Bella to process what had just happened. She watched him settle back into his bed, though his eyes remained fixed on her enclosure, maintaining his silent vigil. Bella lay awake for a long time after that, her mind replaying Tank's unexpected act of kindness, the feeling of his gentle nudge, the careful attention he'd paid to her wheels. It was more care than she'd received in all her time at the shelter. For the first time, a tiny spark of hope flickered in her heart. Maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as alone as she'd thought. Maybe she mattered after all, even if only to a gruff old dog who'd shown her the first real kindness she could remember. From across the room, Tank's steady gaze continued to watch over her, a silent promise of protection in the darkness. The morning sunlight streamed through the shelter windows, casting warm patches on the floor. Bella wheeled herself toward one of these sunny spots, her movements more purposeful than before. She paused briefly, glancing toward Tank's kennel, where the old dog lay with his head on his paws, watching her with those deep, knowing eyes. "Would you look at that?" Sarah, one of the shelter workers, nudged her colleague. "Bella's really coming out of her shell lately." The shelter manager walked by, clipboard in hand. "Maybe she's finally getting the hang of those wheels. Good to see her attitude improving. Might help her chances of adoption." Bella heard their words but barely registered them. Her attention was focused on navigating the space between the kennels, practicing the movements Tank had shown her the night before. She'd noticed how he'd guided her wheels at an angle, making turns easier. Now she tried to copy that technique, her confidence growing with each successful maneuver. Throughout the morning, Tank observed her progress from his corner. His expression remained stern, but his eyes never left her for long. When a particularly loud dog started barking, making Bella jump and nearly lose her balance, Tank let out a low, warning growl that quickly silenced the disruption. During the quiet afternoon hours, when most of the animals were napping, Tank's mind wandered to memories of his former life. He remembered soft hands scratching behind his ears, a warm lap to rest his head on, and a voice that always made him feel safe. The pain of loss hit him fresh, like a physical ache in his chest. He turned away from the other animals, pressing his nose into the corner of his kennel. "Hey, old boy," a shelter worker said, noticing his withdrawal. "Still having those rough days, huh?" Tank didn't respond, lost in his grief, but a small sound caught his attention, the gentle squeak of Bella's wheels as she moved closer to his kennel. He didn't turn around, but his ears twitched at her approach. "It's okay to be sad sometimes," Bella said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I get sad too." Tank's shoulders tensed. He hadn't meant for anyone to witness his moment of vulnerability, especially not the little cat he'd been trying so hard not to care about. But there was something in her voice, an understanding that went beyond pity, that made him slowly turn his head. Their eyes met through the kennel bars. For a moment, neither moved. Then Tank shifted slightly, making space near the kennel door where Bella could see him better. It wasn't an invitation exactly, but it wasn't a rejection either. Throughout the day, Tank found himself making these small gestures. When the shelter workers brought food, he waited until Bella had started eating before touching his own meal. When she practiced her turns, He positioned himself where she could see him, subtly adjusting his posture to show her how to balance her weight better. "I've never seen Tank so alert," one of the workers commented during afternoon rounds. "Usually he just sleeps all day." "Probably just restless," the shelter manager replied, making notes on his clipboard. "These older dogs can get that way sometimes." But it was more than restlessness. Every time Tank felt himself drawn to Bella's determined efforts, memories of his lost home would surface, warning him about the pain of attachment. Yet watching her work so hard to overcome her challenges stirred something in him, a protective instinct he thought he'd buried along with his grief. Bella noticed the conflict in Tank's behavior, how he would move closer only to withdraw, how his eyes would soften before he caught himself and looked away. She recognized the fear behind his actions because she carried similar fears herself. Each time he pulled back, she gave him space, but she didn't stop trying to connect. Late in the afternoon, when the shelter grew quiet again, Bella wheeled herself near Tank's kennel. She didn't try to get too close, remembering how he'd retreated earlier. Instead, she settled into a patch of sunlight where he could see her and began grooming herself, her movements careful and deliberate. Tank watched her from his kennel, his internal struggle visible in the way his body shifted restlessly. The familiar urge to withdraw warred with a growing desire to protect and care for this small, determined creature who refused to give up. Finally, he let out a long breath, as if releasing something heavy he'd been carrying. He moved closer to the kennel door, lying down where Bella could see him clearly. It was a small gesture, but in it was the beginning of acceptance. Not just of Bella's presence in his life, but of the possibility that perhaps his heart wasn't as closed as he'd thought. The shelter manager sat at his desk, surrounded by stacks of unpaid bills and financial reports. His weathered face looked even more tired than usual as he rubbed his temples. Through the office window, he could see the kennels filling up with more animals each day, while their resources stretched thinner and thinner. "We're going to have to make some tough decisions," he told his staff during their morning meeting. "We've got 2 weeks to find homes for at least half of our animals, or we'll have to start considering alternatives." The news spread through the shelter like a cold draft. Even the animals seemed to sense the growing tension, their usual barks and meows becoming more subdued. In their corner, Bella and Tank listened to the worried conversations of the shelter workers. "What's going to happen to us?" a young tabby cat asked from the cage next to Bella's. Bella looked at Tank, who had moved closer to his kennel door. His presence gave her a courage she didn't know she had. "We have to stay hopeful," she said, her voice stronger than she felt. Other animals began to gather near their corner, drawn by Bella's unexpected optimism. They'd noticed the unusual friendship forming between the disabled kitten and the grieving dog, and something about their bond gave them hope. "But you're different," a small terrier whimpered. "You two have something special." Tank, who usually kept to himself, surprised everyone by speaking up. "We're all special," he said gruffly, but with unexpected gentleness. "Bella taught me that." Throughout the day, potential adopters came and went. Some animals left with new families, while others watched with increasing anxiety. The shelter manager moved through the kennels with his clipboard, making notes and having hushed conversations with the staff. In the afternoon, a woman in her early 40s walked into the shelter. She moved slowly through the kennels, taking time to really look at each animal. When she reached Bella's corner, she paused, watching as Tank gently nudged Bella's wheels with his nose, helping her turn more easily. "I've never seen anything quite like that," she said to one of the shelter workers. "How long have they been friends?" The worker explained their story, how Tank had arrived withdrawn and grieving, and how Bella had been overlooked because of her disability. As they talked, the woman's eyes grew soft with understanding. "They help each other," she observed, watching Tank guide Bella through another turn. "It's beautiful." The shelter manager, noticing her interest, approached with barely contained hope. "They're both available for adoption," he said, trying to keep his voice neutral. Separately or... He hesitated. Together. The woman considered this, watching as other animals gathered around Bella and Tank, seeking comfort in their presence. A scared puppy pressed close to Tank's kennel, and instead of pulling away, the old dog let out a reassuring rumble. Bella wheeled herself near the puppy, demonstrating how she'd learned to move with confidence despite her wheels. "They've become quite the role models," the shelter worker said softly. "The other animals look up to them." The woman nodded, but didn't make any promises. She took some information from the shelter manager and said she'd think about it. As she left, Bella and Tank watched her go, trying not to let hope rise too high in their hearts. That evening, as the shelter grew quiet, the animals gathered closer to Bella and Tank's corner than ever before. The uncertainty of their future hung heavy in the air, but something about the unlikely pair's bond gave them strength. "How do you stay so brave?" a timid cat asked Bella. Bella glanced at Tank before answering. "I'm not always brave," she admitted. "But having a friend who believes in you makes it easier to believe in yourself." Tank's ears twitched at her words. He'd spent so long protecting himself from pain that he'd forgotten how healing it could be to care for someone else. Now, watching Bella share her newfound confidence with the others, he felt his hardened heart soften even more. The shelter manager made one final walk through the kennels that night, his flashlight beam sweeping over the anxious faces. When he reached Bella and Tank's corner, he paused, noticing how the other animals had clustered around them. "Well," he murmured to himself, "maybe miracles do happen." But miracles weren't guaranteed, and as the lights dimmed for the night, the reality of their situation remained uncertain. Bella wheeled herself as close to Tank's kennel as she could get, drawing comfort from his solid presence. Together they faced an unknown future, their unlikely connection a beacon of hope, not just for themselves, but for all the animals around them. The next morning, Sarah Mitchell returned to the shelter, her heart still full of the remarkable scene she'd witnessed the day before. She'd spent the night thinking about the unlikely pair, the disabled kitten with her wheeled support and the aging German shepherd who'd become her protector. The shelter manager greeted her with barely contained hope in his tired eyes. "Welcome back, Ms. Mitchell. Are you here to see anyone in particular?" Sarah nodded, following him through the maze of kennels. "I'd like to spend more time with Bella and Tank, if that's possible." As they approached the corner where Bella and Tank stayed, other animals perked up, watching intently. The shelter manager opened Bella's enclosure first, carefully lifting the small gray kitten and placing her on the floor. Her wheels made a soft clicking sound against the concrete as she oriented herself. Tank watched from his kennel, his eyes fixed on Bella's every move. When his door was opened, he stepped out slowly, immediately positioning himself near the kitten. Sarah sat cross-legged on the floor, observing their interaction. "I've been thinking about them all night," she admitted to the shelter manager. "But I'm worried. I've never cared for a disabled pet before, and Tank's age." She trailed off, her brow furrowed with concern. The shelter manager understood her hesitation. "It's a big responsibility," he agreed. "Bella needs regular maintenance for her wheels, and Tank might have health issues as he gets older." As if sensing their discussion was about them, Tank moved closer to Bella. The kitten had gotten herself turned around awkwardly, struggling to right herself. Without prompting, Tank gently nudged her wheels with his nose, helping her adjust her position. Then, in a moment of pure tenderness, he leaned down and licked her face, his tail wagging slightly. Bella's response was immediate. She purred loudly, rubbing her head against Tank's leg. The bond between them was undeniable, their mutual support evident in every interaction. Sarah felt tears welling up in her eyes. "They really take care of each other, don't they?" The shelter manager nodded, his own expression softening. "Tank came to us completely shut down after losing his owner. We'd never seen him show interest in anyone or anything until Bella. And Bella, well, she was so withdrawn before Tank started looking out for her." Sarah watched as Tank positioned himself protectively near Bella while she explored the room, his eyes never leaving her. When she approached Sarah, Tank followed, maintaining his gentle vigilance. "I have a big house with a fenced yard," Sarah said slowly, reaching out to stroke Tank's graying muzzle. "And I work from home, so I'd be there to help with Bella's needs." The shelter manager held his breath, hardly daring to hope. "They'd need regular vet checkups," he explained. "Bella's wheels need adjustment as she grows, and Tank should have senior wellness exams." "I understand," Sarah interrupted, her voice growing stronger. "And I want to do it. I want to adopt them both." Tank's ears perked up at her words, and Bella wheeled herself closer to Sarah's leg, as if understanding the magnitude of the moment. The shelter manager couldn't hide his smile. "Are you sure? It's a big commitment?" "I've never been more sure," Sarah replied, watching as Tank once again helped Bella navigate around a corner. "They belong together, and I want to give them a home where they can take care of each other." As the shelter manager went to get the adoption paperwork, Sarah sat with her soon-to-be new family members. Tank settled down beside her, and Bella maneuvered herself close to both of them, her purring filling the quiet space. "We're going to figure this out together," Sarah promised them, her hand resting gently on Tank's head while Bella nudged against her other hand. "All of us." The other animals in the shelter watched the scene unfold, their own hopes lifting at seeing the unexpected pair finally find their forever home. The shelter manager returned with the papers, his steps lighter than they'd been in weeks. As Sarah began filling out the adoption forms, Tank leaned down once more to lick Bella's face, as if reassuring her that everything would be all right. And for the first time since she'd arrived at the shelter, Bella felt completely, utterly safe. The afternoon sun streamed through the shelter windows as Sarah finished the last of the paperwork. Tank sat beside Bella, watching the shelter staff gather their belongings, a worn blanket, a few favorite toys, and Bella's spare set of wheels. The change in Tank was remarkable. Where once he'd been a shadow of himself, now his eyes held a spark of life. As one of the younger shelter dogs bounced past, Tank's tail actually wagged, something the staff hadn't seen since his arrival. "Would you look at that?" whispered one of the volunteers to another. "I never thought I'd see old Tank play again." Indeed, Tank had begun to show playful gestures that surprised everyone. When Bella wheeled herself around him in excited circles, he responded by doing a little hop, just a small one, but it was enough to make the entire staff stop and stare. It was as if years of grief had begun to melt away, replaced by something warmer and brighter. "He's like a different dog," the shelter manager remarked, shaking his head in amazement. "When he first came here, he wouldn't even look at anyone. Now look at him." Bella wheeled herself confidently around the shelter's main room, no longer hiding in corners or avoiding attention. Her transformation was just as striking as Tank's. She held her head high, her wheels clicking steadily against the floor. Every few moments, she would glance back at Tank, as if making sure he was still watching over her. Sarah knelt down beside them both. "Ready to go home?" she asked softly, reaching out to scratch behind Tank's ears. Tank's tail wagged at her touch, but as Sarah attached his leash and began walking toward the shelter's front door, he suddenly froze. His paws seemed rooted to the spot, and his eyes took on a distant, haunted look. The memory of his last home, of the owner he'd lost, crashed over him like a wave. The shelter manager recognized that look. "It's okay, big guy," he said gently. "This is a good thing." But Tank remained frozen, his body trembling slightly. The last time he'd left a home he'd known, his whole world had fallen apart. The fear of losing everything again made his legs feel heavy as stone. Bella, noticing Tank's distress, wheeled herself around to face him. She had come to know his moods, to understand the shadows that sometimes crossed his face. Without hesitation, she moved forward and bumped her head against his front leg, purring loudly enough for everyone to hear. The small act of affection seemed to break through Tank's fear. He looked down at the determined little kitten who had somehow worked her way into his heart. Bella nudged him again, more insistently this time, as if to say, "We're in this together." Tank's posture began to relax. He lowered his head to nuzzle Bella, his breath ruffling her soft gray fur. The shelter staff watched in amazement as the once broken dog found his courage in the love of a tiny disabled kitten. "That's it," Sarah encouraged, her voice thick with emotion. "We're all going home together." Step by step, with Bella wheeling along beside him, Tank moved toward the shelter door. His tail began to wag again, hesitantly at first, then with growing confidence. Each time he slowed or showed signs of uncertainty, Bella would wheel closer, her presence a constant reminder that he wasn't alone anymore. The shelter manager held the door open, watching as his unlikely pair prepared to leave. Tank's transformation from the grieving, isolated dog who had arrived months ago to this gentler, more open-hearted creature was nothing short of miraculous. And Bella, once so unsure of her place in the world, now moved with the assurance of someone who knew she was loved. As they approached Sarah's car, Tank's stride became more confident. He helped Bella navigate the parking lot, gently guiding her wheels around small obstacles with his nose. His protective nature had found a new purpose, and his fear of loving again had been overcome by the simple, unconditional affection of a small gray kitten who had needed him just as much as he had needed her. The shelter staff gathered at the door, watching as Sarah carefully lifted Bella into the car, Tank following close behind. Through the window, they could see Tank settling into the back seat, Bella immediately wheeling herself closer to lean against his side. His tail wagged steadily now, all hesitation gone, ready to face whatever came next with his unlikely best friend by his side. The morning sun painted warm patches on the hardwood floor of Sarah's cozy suburban home. Tank lay stretched out in one of these golden squares, his watchful eyes following Bella as she explored their new surroundings. Her wheels clicked softly against the floor as she moved from room to room, investigating every corner with growing confidence. "This is your home now," Sarah said softly, sitting cross-legged on the floor nearby. She had taken 2 weeks off work to help her new pets adjust, and her patience was already paying off. Tank's ears perked up at her voice, but his gaze remained fixed on Bella. The protective instinct that had awakened in him at the shelter had only grown stronger. Every time Bella's wheels caught on a rug or struggled with a transition between rooms, Tank was there, gently nudging her forward with his nose. Sarah had prepared the house thoughtfully, installing small ramps in strategic locations to help Bella navigate different floor levels. She'd created cozy sleeping spots in every room, plush beds for Tank, and smaller wheeled accessible platforms for Bella. But more often than not, they chose to sleep side by side. "You two are quite the pair," Sarah observed, watching as Bella wheeled herself over to Tank and settled against his side. The big dog's tail thumped contentedly against the floor, and Bella's purr filled the quiet room. As days turned into weeks, both animals began to shed the emotional armor they'd worn at the shelter. Bella no longer startled at sudden movements or tried to hide when visitors came. Instead, she would wheel herself proudly into the room, often showing off by doing small spins that made everyone smile. Her wheels, once a source of shame, had become part of who she was. Not a limitation, but simply her unique way of moving through the world. Tank's transformation was equally remarkable. The deep sadness that had clouded his eyes began to lift. He started playing again, something Sarah hadn't expected from an older dog who had experienced such loss. It started small, a playful bow here, a gentle chase there. But his favorite game was playing escort to Bella, walking beside her as she explored the backyard, making sure she didn't get stuck in the grass. "Good boy, Tank," Sarah would say, her heart swelling as she watched him guide Bella through the garden. Such a good boy. The nights brought their own healing. When thunderstorms rolled through, Bella would wheel herself quickly to Tank's bed, seeking comfort in his solid presence. Tank, who once would have retreated into himself during such disturbances, found purpose in protecting his small friend. He would curl around her, his body creating a safe harbor until the storm passed. Sarah often found herself amazed at their bond. One afternoon, while working in her home office, she watched as Bella attempted to reach a sunny windowsill that was just too high for her wheels. Before Sarah could move to help, Tank had positioned himself beside the window, becoming a living ramp. Bella wheeled up his back with practiced ease, settling into the warm spot while Tank stood guard below. "You two have figured it all out, haven't you?" Sarah marveled, reaching for her camera to capture the moment. The emotional scars they carried began to fade, replaced by new memories and routines. Tank no longer hesitated at doorways, no longer feared that leaving a room meant losing everything he loved. Bella's confidence grew daily, her wheels clicking through the house with purpose and joy. She had found her place in the world, not as the overlooked shelter kitten, but as a beloved companion who brought smiles to everyone she met. Their evening routine became sacred. After dinner, Tank would settle into his favorite spot in the living room, and Bella would wheel herself over, performing what Sarah called their nightly ritual. She would circle Tank 3 times, her wheels making soft sounds against the floor before tucking herself against his side. Tank would then carefully position his head so he could keep one eye on his small friend while still relaxing. "My beautiful odd couple," Sarah would say fondly, watching them from her armchair. The transformation was most evident in the small moments. When Sarah's friends visited, they marveled at how Tank, once so withdrawn, now greeted them with a wagging tail. Bella, rather than hiding, would wheel herself right up to visitors, showing off her mobility with pride. Their confidence in their new life grew stronger each day, their past hurts healing in the warmth of their unlikely friendship. One particularly memorable afternoon, Sarah watched as Tank and Bella dozed in the sunroom. Bella's wheels glinted in the light, no longer a symbol of what she lacked, but a part of what made her special. Tank's face, once perpetually creased with worry, was peaceful in sleep. The big dog had found new purpose in caring for his small friend, and in doing so, had found his own path to healing. Sarah knew she had given them more than just a home. She had given them a chance to be themselves, to be loved for exactly who they were. Tank's age and past grief, Bella's wheels and different abilities, none of it mattered here. What mattered was the bond they shared, the love that had transformed them both from broken shelter animals into confident, happy companions. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the floor, Sarah watched Tank and Bella share a quiet moment. Bella wheeled herself closer to Tank, pressing her small body against his large one. Tank's tail wagged gently, and he lowered his head to nuzzle her fur. In that simple gesture was everything they had become to each other: protector and protected, friend and family, each made whole by the other's love. Their new home had become more than just a place to live. It had become a sanctuary where 2 wounded souls had found healing in their unlikely friendship. Every corner held evidence of their journey: the well-worn paths of Bella's wheels, the comfortable spots where Tank kept watch, the shared beds and toys that spoke of their inseparable bond. Here, they had found not just shelter, but the peace that comes from being truly understood and unconditionally loved. 6 months after Tank and Bella's adoption, Sarah brought them back to visit the shelter. The familiar building looked different now, its walls freshly painted and decorated with success stories. The biggest photo, right by the entrance, showed Tank and Bella together, the unlikely pair that had changed everything. The shelter manager greeted them with a warm smile, so different from his previously worn expression. "There they are, our stars." He knelt down to pet Tank, who accepted the attention with gentle dignity. Bella wheeled forward confidently, her wheels clicking against the floor as she moved to investigate her old home. "Their story has made such a difference," the manager said, watching Bella navigate the space with ease. "People come in asking specifically about special needs animals now. They want to know if we have any unexpected pairs like Tank and Bella. Inside, the shelter had transformed. Gone were the sad, resigned faces that had once filled the kennels. Instead, the animals seemed more hopeful, more engaged. A three-legged cat played cheerfully with a senior dog, while a blind puppy cuddled with an older cat who acted as his guide. It started with them, the manager explained, gesturing to Tank and Bella. After their story spread, people began to see possibilities instead of problems. They started looking past age or disability to see the heart of each animal. Tank moved through the shelter with quiet confidence, so different from the withdrawn dog who had first arrived. He paused at his old kennel, now occupied by another elderly dog who wagged his tail in greeting. Bella wheeled alongside him, occasionally bumping against his leg affectionately. A young couple visiting the shelter watched them with wonder. "Is that the famous pair?" the woman asked, her eyes bright with emotion. "We read about them online. They're the reason we came here today." Sarah nodded, watching as Tank gently nosed Bella's wheels, checking them as he always did. It was a gesture that had become second nature to him, a simple act of care that spoke volumes about their bond. The shelter staff had created a wall of happy tales, successful adoption stories that had followed in Tank and Bella's wake. Photos showed animals who might once have been overlooked finding their forever homes, senior pets, disabled animals, unlikely pairs who had formed bonds like Tank and Bella's. "Their example changed how we do things here," the manager admitted. "We started encouraging these unexpected friendships, letting animals choose their own companions. The results have been amazing." Back at home that evening, Tank and Bella settled into their favorite spot by the window. The setting sun cast long shadows across the floor, but neither seemed to notice. They were too content in each other's company. Tank's gray muzzle had grown whiter over the months, but his eyes remained bright and alert, especially when watching over Bella. She had grown too, not in size but in spirit. Her wheels, once a source of shame, now moved with grace and purpose. As they relaxed together, Tank did something that brought tears to Sarah's eyes. He gently licked Bella's wheels, just as he had that first night in the shelter. But this time, there was no hesitation, no uncertainty. The gesture was filled with joy and purpose, a reminder of how far they'd come. Bella responded with a loud purr, rubbing her head against Tank's muzzle. Their bond had deepened beyond mere friendship into something profound and healing. They had found in each other not just companionship, but redemption. Their story had rippled outward, touching lives beyond their own. The shelter, once a place of last resort, had become a sanctuary of second chances. Animals who might once have been deemed unadoptable were finding homes, their unique qualities celebrated rather than hidden. Tank and Bella's days fell into peaceful rhythms. They shared sunny spots and rainy afternoons, quiet moments and playful ones. Their bond remained unshakable, a testament to the transformative power of unexpected kindness. Together, they had proven that broken spirits could mend, that differences could become strengths, and that love could heal the deepest wounds. Their story had become more than just a tale of adoption. It was a reminder that sometimes the most beautiful connections come from the most unexpected places. As the sun set on another day, Tank and Bella remained side by side, their unlikely friendship a beacon of hope for others. They had found in each other not just a companion, but a reason to believe in second chances and the healing power of unconditional love. Thank you for watching. Stories like this remind us who we are. If something touched your heart, go ahead and subscribe. I'll be back tomorrow with another story that just might stay with you.